Well, today's talk is pretty much what you just heard. The adults' talk is pretty much the same as the kids' talk, but we'll have a little more fun with it, I think. I was looking around for how to convey some of the aspects of the story of the fall of this kingdom, and I came across this guy who was actually writing about his experience as an IT professional. And he's writing about some of the problems he sees with companies and how they guard their network from outside attacks. So I'll read you a couple paragraphs from what he wrote here that I thought are pertinent to today. It says, "Not all attacks on your network come from the cyber world. Some attacks come physically, and if employees aren't vigilant or trained well, they could unknowingly allow a potential breach. I've worked in the IT sector for years, and I started my career on a help desk. My job often involved having to go to client sites, but be it for a general checkup on the equipment, an outage, or because a support ticket could not be resolved remotely. In my time, I have only been stopped from entering a server room once. Let me tell you a story about which when I look back on it, was rather worrisome. I started my help desk job, and my role was to answer the phone and solve simple issues and escalate the not so simple. Due to an issue with the uniforms being shipped to us, I didn't have an official uniform to wear. But I was just on the help desk, and this didn't really matter too much until I was sent to the client site. I was given some business cards, so if I was challenged, I could show them where I was from, and all should be fine. I arrived on site in plain clothing without a name badge or any identification and walked up to the reception saying I was from company X and I was here to deal with a problem they were experiencing on their server. The receptionist welcomed me and walked me to the server and unlocked the door. I thanked her, let her know I'd be a little while, and asked if it was okay for me to let her know when I was done. She was happy to leave me be for the next hour. No one came to see how I was getting on or question my being there. Not once was I asked for ID, and no one called my office to ensure I was meant to be there. For the next hour, I was free to do whatever I wanted on this server." You know, I like this idea that the new church has that we live in a good world. I like the idea that there are good people around us, and I like telling stories about the goodness of people that I encounter just out in everyday life, because so often we hear on the news the negative. So I like this idea that we are trusting of others and we see the best in others. But at the same time, we have to have a degree of vigilance that we don't let down our guard for things to creep into our lives that aren't supposed to be there. Things that the Lord says, look, you know what, if you just do what I say, everything will be okay. And then we kind of start questioning ourselves and going, well, you know, did the Lord really say I shouldn't do this? You know, we start to lose the vigilance when things get to be too good or too comfortable. And this is what's happening with this guy. He's like, not all the attacks come from the cables. They don't come from another computer. They don't come from some hacker on the other end trying to go in. He says, sometimes you can have all the great internet security in the world, but somebody's just going to physically walk up and grab your server or do it right there. He'll take the USB stick, plug it in, and do whatever he wants. I'm not sure this happens not all that often, but I don't think that's the point. I think the point is saying that's where things can go wrong if we don't stay vigilant. And I think this is what we're seeing in today's story with Solomon, that the vigilance is just lost. He's got it all. It's all sorted. David's not there. David was super vigilant, always looking out. Is the Lord saying to do this? Okay, this is what we're going to do. Yeah, this is happening. Well, the Lord must be commanding it, you know, whatever. That was always the forefront of David's mind, was, what is the Lord doing? How am I accomplishing the Lord's goals? And with Solomon, we don't get that. Solomon seems to be interested in accomplishing his own goals, or at least that's where it ends up. So I'm going to read some of these verses again. Some of them we just read for the kids, but I'm going to pause a couple of ways to bring some things out of it. So this is from 1 Kings chapter 11. Now the Lord raised up an adversary against Solomon, Hadad the Edomite. He was a descendant of the king of Edom. For it happened that when David was in Edom, and Joab the commander of the army had gone to bury the slain, after he had killed every male in Edom, that Hadad fled to Egypt, and he and certain Edomites of his father's servants with him. Hadad was still a little child. So when Hadad heard in Egypt that David rested with his fathers, and that Joab the commander of the army was dead, Hadad said to Pharaoh, "Let me depart, that I may go to my own country." Okay, so David and Joab are dead. The vigilant forces that were trying to secure the land and push out the enemies are gone. So suddenly Hadad sees that the vigilance is not there, and I just want to go back. Pharaoh says, "But what have you lacked with me that you should suddenly go to your own country?" "Nothing, but let me go anyway." So off he goes, and you skip down to the next reading, Secrets of Heaven 83:14. It tells us what Edomites are. It says, "Edom, as those who are ruled by the evil of self-love, seize on falsities and cast aside truths," or, as in the sense abstracted from persons, the evil of self-love which embraces falsity and rejects truth. So that Edom also represents those who lead a life of evil arising from that love, namely self-love. So when you look at this story, you can say, all right, Solomon had it all, and he starts to worship these other gods. And then what pops up? What's the adversary that pops up in this scenario? It's self-love. And it's not too hard to kind of imagine being Solomon and going, man, look at all this stuff I've got. I've got a great kingdom. I've got plenty of wives. I've got lots of wealth. And I'm really smart. I'm the wisest of all kings. And you can imagine it going to the point where he's starting to be loving himself. He's not remembering where all this came from, and he's like, yeah, I really am fantastic. And so the love of self pops up and starts to cause trouble in the kingdom. No longer is it sufficient just to have everything, but now he's got to make sure that everybody, uses power to make sure everybody loves him and adores him. And that's going to be the basis for more trouble. But that's not the only adversary that we get. Verse 23, God raised up another adversary against him, Rezon, the son of Eliada, who fled from his lord Hadazer, king of Zobah. So when he gathered men and became captain over a band of raiders, when David killed those of Zobah. So once again, we see David vigilant, David pushing things back, but now that David's gone, here comes. So, and they went to Damascus to dwell there, and they reigned in Damascus. He was an adversary of Israel all the days of Solomon, beside the trouble that Hadad caused, and he abhorred Israel, and he reigned over Syria. Again, you skip down to prophets and Psalms, and it says, those who place religion in nothing but knowing knowledges, which is Damascus. So here we have these two guys. We have one who's about love of self, and again, Solomon can probably think that, well, look, I am doing the religion. I know all the rules. I'm eating my breads on the right day, and I'm not eating these things, and I'm offering the right sacrifices. I know how to do religion. And that's this Rezon guy, where the religion has stopped being about trying to do the Lord's will. Religion has become about, well, I know all the rules. And so we have these two new enemies that pop up. And last week that the topic was about repetition and how we need repetition and routine to hold our life together. But we also see repetition and routine in the Bible story. And we have these big arcs of stories, and within them there's these smaller ones that repeat the bigger ones. And what we're seeing here is, we have paradise, and for some reason we like to throw it away. And we throw it away because of our own desire to feel self-important. The story, we have the glass work here of the Garden of Eden. And the Garden of Eden starts out, everything's great. You've got a paradise. You know the story, right? I mean, what comes along? The serpent says, did God really say you should not eat from this tree? And the woman says, yes, actually, he did say we shouldn't eat from the tree. And he says, oh, well, but he's just saying that because he doesn't want you to be as wise as he is. Look, look, you can see the tree is beautiful. The fruit's great. Everything's fine. You could be as smart if you just ate from this. Of course they do. And this is our own ego getting caught up in the good things that happen in our life, where we say, you know what, I do know enough. I don't need to be vigilant over this one because I can see with my own eyes, I can compute with my own mind that this is going to be okay. And throughout Scriptures, we're warned that our ego is going to cause us problems. And Secrets of Heaven and all the stuff that is given to us through the writings says, watch out for this trap because the things that belong to you are not good. Here's what it says in Secrets of Heaven 2:10, and as you might could guess, this is taken out of the context of the Adam and Eve story because it parallels so nicely. It says, man's own is all the evil and falsity that springs from the love of self and of the world, and from not believing in the Lord or the Word, but in self, and from supposing that what cannot be apprehended sensuously and by means of memory knowledge is nothing. Okay, so these are the two enemies we just had for Solomon. The love of self, so that's Hadad the Edomite, and the whole idea that if you can't figure it out through your senses, it's nothing. That's the Rezon, the guy from Damascus. So what we have of our own is these two enemies. It says, in this way, men or people become mere evil and falsity, and therefore regard all things pervertedly. Things that are evil they see as good, and things that are good they see as evil. Things that are false they see as true, and things that are true as false. Things that really exist they suppose to be nothing, and things that are nothing they suppose to be everything. They call hatred love, darkness light, death life, and the converse. In the word, such men are called the lame and the blind. Such then is the own of man, which is in itself infernal and accursed. Yes, they own the ego, the proprium, whatever you want to call it, but it's the stuff that we create of our own, and it's not coming from the Lord. And so we develop this pattern because of the ego of we start in paradise, and the Adam and Eve story really descends all the way to the time when they're slaves in Egypt. That's where it basically bottoms out. They are in bondage to the Egyptians, right? And then Moses comes along with the Lord, and they work their way back up, and it's an upward trajectory all the way until we get to Solomon. And we get there, and we've made our way back to paradise. We finally got there. But it's that ego that once again pops in, and just like with Adam and Eve, they got banished from the garden, but life was still pretty darn good for them. The first step out doesn't seem like it's that far down, but it's just this slow descent over hundreds of years, down, down, down. Each little step down doesn't seem that much further lower than the previous one, because it's not. But that's like the whole boiling lobster. You slowly turn the water up. You don't just throw them straight into the hot water. And this is what we do to ourselves. We just slowly descend down. And now that they've made it back to Solomon and back to paradise, the same descent happens again. And this is going to bottom out over the next couple hundred years, where the northern kingdom is come over and taken over by the Syrians, and it's just dispersed. It just goes away. It's wiped from history. I mean, it never comes back. It's gone. You'll never hear from it ever again. These people are lost to history. The southern kingdom comes in, is taken over by Babylon. And this is the story of where like the Daniel and all that stuff comes from. And we had a nice series on Daniel earlier this year, and it ties in quite nicely because Nebuchadnezzar, we talked about, was this really, really selfish person who lived for manipulating others for his own end. It wasn't like he was just a little bit selfish. He was a lot selfish. So this trajectory from Solomon goes from great, wise, and everything. Selfishness pops up and slowly descends. The selfishness expands and expands and expands until it takes over what's left of the good person and exile it. It's like another Egyptian slavery. It's the exact same thing. And it's because they failed to stay vigilant. You know, I think it was last week or a couple weeks ago, we've been working this Solomon story where we talked about how Solomon, he fortified the city walls. All the cities were built up. You know, you weren't going to overpower Solomon with your military. He had a huge fighting force. Nobody was more powerful militarily, and nobody was better defended than Solomon against an outside attack. But it wasn't that outside attack that undid him. It was the attack from within. It was like almost a Trojan horse type scenario where he brings in these wives. The Lord says, don't intermarry because they're going to lead you astray. Oh, it'll be fine. And it starts the degradation there. It's just like this IT story that I was reading at the beginning where the guy says, not all of your network attacks come through the wires. They don't all come as an outside attack. Sometimes you just go to the server room and you open the door and you say, here you go, have at it. Call me when you're done. And this guy's like, what are you doing? That person could do anything they want. They have access to all the passwords. They have access to all the proprietary corporate data. They have access to any secret recipes or whatever that the company has. They've got everything. And it happens because they lost their vigilance. And I for me, that's what I take out of this, is that throughout it all, we have to remain humble about what we have in our life. And not let that ego come in and say, oh, look at all the stuff I've accomplished in my life. We've got to be humble and say, well, no, this is all the stuff that the Lord gave me. It's a standard lesson in church to be humble and kind, right? It's a standard thing to say, well, look, attribute all good things to the Lord. And this is why. This is why that exists, because as we keep that as our center focus, look, everything that the Lord's given me has been great, everything He does is good, and everything I've got is from Him, we as we stay vigilant about that, we don't become like Solomon, who starts to have that self-love pop up and slowly corrode and destroy the kingdom that we're working really hard to set up. Amen.